The three inquisitors, in their capacity as directors of information and intelligence, counterintelligence, in the 16th century they engaged one Agostino Amati to make them a code book. Poor writer, his name is misspelled on his own book. And these are the 16th century codes, of which they look like there are thousands of them here, in which messages would be sent back and forth from every country in Europe, Asia too, in these codes. What would happen is an ambassador would be sent out with a code, and he'd send back a message. They'd put this thing with the holes over it, and they would read it. That's a relatively simple code. Some of these are of a complexity. This looks like it could be Greek. Extraordinary. He's even inventing alphabets, which I think is very brave of him, since so few people master the ones they have. It was also interesting that when the ambassador came back, just to make sure that he wasn't going to appropriate one of these codes for himself, for private uses, he was obliged to return it to the three inquisitors, to the state, where presumably it went back into the book here, like this one here, which turns round, and they would give it back to the inquisitors, who would then send out another ambassador with it, or with a brand new code. Here's a very complex one. This, I suppose, that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 of these things. You push one way, one the other way. As you can see, Agostino Amati did not have much spare time. There are thousands of codes, all in one interest, which is that for a Venetian, knowledge and intelligence were power. At the time of that code book, Leonardo Loredan was Doge of a Venice the whole world envied. In fact, the European powers formed a league in 1508 to overthrow the Republic. But the Venetians outwitted Pope, kings, and the Holy Roman Emperor. But then Venetian resourcefulness was always peculiarly relentless. Secreta secretissima. That means top secret, eyes only, burn on sight. These are orders, secret orders within the council, and responses to requests. And here is Brother Joannes di Raguseo proposes to the council that for 1,500 ducats a year for life, he will kill anybody they want him to and not be caught. He has developed, I'm sight reading from the Latin, which is always difficult for me. He has got many extraordinary ways of poisoning people, and the good brother, it doesn't say what order he belongs to, puts himself at the disposal of the council. This is his proposal to the council. Now the council then proceeds to vote whether or not to hire Brother John. Here's the vote. 10 of them said, okay, we will hire Brother John. 6 are cautious and say no. And they agree to take him on at 1,500 ducats a year. But being good Venetians, there's a trial period. So they suggest in a little footnote, why doesn't he have a go at killing the Holy Roman Emperor? The torture chambers were in the Doge's palace, conveniently near the inquisitors and the Council of 10. Here, enemies of the state were strangled, or sometimes beheaded, or drowned, or drawn and quartered, always in secret. You never really knew who had been executed until you happened to see his body hanging upside down in front of the palace. Although torture and summary execution were standard procedures,
they were not all that common. The rulers of Venice were the first to realize that the most effective means of controlling a people are psychological, through subtle intimidation.
This is the antechamber to the awesome Council of Ten. Now, the Council of Ten had many powers and responsibilities, and one of them was to ride herd on the aristocratic class of the city of Venice. So they would summon them, sometimes quite arbitrarily. You'd get a summons, present yourself to the Council of Ten next Friday. Well, the nobleman would have a good week to worry about that. He would come here, he would sit on these uncomfortable benches, or he would pace up and down nervously, wondering what on earth it was that he had done. And this was interesting psychologically because it was a kind of warfare. When you don't have a large police force, you don't have the means of intimidating a population, you must do it through psychology. So he would have had a week to worry, he'd have all day here, and then somebody would come out and say, "They don't want to see you. You can go home now." Well, they've made him very, very nervous, which was plainly the object of their enterprise.
Anonymous denunciations would be placed here. Should the accusation prove to be untrue, the accuser would be found out and punished. The real life of Venice goes on, as it always has, away from the palaces and the tourists. The word ghetto means foundry, so originally there was a foundry here. Then the Jews were confined to this quarter, to the ghetto, a word Venice gave the world. Jews still live here, but then Jews were generally better off in Venice than in any other Christian city. The Venetians were nothing if not practical. Their principal trade was with the East, where the Jews had many connections. So the Venetians used the Jews as they did everyone. That is also why, when the Inquisition at Rome accused the Venetians of not burning enough Jews as heretics, the Venetians serenely replied that as the Jews had never been Christian to begin with, they could hardly be heretics. On the other hand, the Republic kept a cold and watchful eye on the Marranos, Jews who had converted to Christianity. It was always feared that they might be crypto-infidels. Meanwhile, back at the Ottoman Empire, thanks to Sultan Mehmed II, Venice was on the defensive. During the next century, between 1540 and 1571, the Turks conquered Nauplia, Naxos, the Cyclades, the great island of Cyprus. But the Venetians were far from finished. They appealed to their former European enemies. We must all stop the Turks, they said. The result was the Battle of Lepanto, where the Turkish fleet was destroyed by a European fleet to which Venice had contributed the greater part. In the battle, 8,000 Christians died, 20,000 Muslims. The West was safe for the time being. But in the next century, the Turks laid siege to Heraklion in Crete. For 22 years, the Venetian garrison withstood the enemy. Crete was Venice's last bastion. When Crete fell in 1669, the Venetian Empire was effectively ended. What had been acquired and held through cunning and resourcefulness was lost, in the end, to brute force and Islam.